Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where any combination of Dr. Ross, Christian Sherrill, or Brian Page hosts national experts who share ideas to manage money in the home as a team. Today's guest is the godfather of the FIRE movement, J.L. Collins. J.L.'s first book, The Simple Path to Wealth, has sold over 500,000 copies worldwide. If you're looking for ideas to reach your financial New Year's resolution goals, look no further than J.L. Collins' wisdom shared in Simple Path to Wealth and his new book, Pathfinders, Extraordinary Stories of People Like You on the Quest for Financial Independence and How to Join Them. Enjoy today's discussion with J.L. Collins, who will help you be your own Pathfinder to begin your new year. Welcome, J.L.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm sure our listeners heard from the introduction. We have with us the godfather of the FIRE movement. And we could not be more thrilled. And if it is something that you're considering, or you recognize that you want to somehow have a money-related New Year's resolution goal, there's nobody better to learn from. And a matter of fact, you could argue that his new book, Pathfinders, is really a roadmap for our listeners to reach your money-related New Year's resolutions goal. So let's go ahead and get started by helping our listeners understand what the FIRE movement is and the different types of FIRE movements.
Well, FIRE is an acronym that stands for Financially Independent, Retire Early. And I have kind of mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, it's clever, and I like it for that reason. But retiring early was never my personal goal, so I tend to only talk about the FI part of it, the becoming financially independent. And you were kind enough to mention Pathfinders at the beginning. That's actually my follow-up to my first book, The Simple Path to Wealth. But in many ways, it's, for somebody who's new to my work, it's the better starting place, because Pathfinders is filled with about 100 stories of people who are actually doing this. And so when you read Pathfinders, you're going to learn that it's, first of all, it's possible, and the simple path to wealth actually works. And then if it resonates with you, then you can turn to the simple path to wealth, which actually lays out exactly how to go about doing this. It's sort of the user's manual, if you will.
So our listeners might not necessarily want to go all in on the FIRE movement, but they very well may want to go in on the first two letters in the acronym FI. And there are countless lessons from your new book, as well as from The Simple Path to Wealth, that they can apply. Why do you think couples specifically start their journey asking themselves this question? What is their time worth?
Well, first of all, I'm not entirely sure that couples routinely do that, but I think it's a great starting point, because your time and how you spend your time is what this is all about. So striving for financial independence is a matter of bringing more options into your life. The more financially strong you are, the more options you have. And it's not just an on-off switch. So it's not a matter of today you're not financially independent, and then, when years from now you become financially independent, things are suddenly wonderful. Each step you take on that journey, and it is a journey, you become a little bit more financially strong. And the stronger you become financially, the bolder you can be in the world, and the better decisions you can make about your time together with your spouse. So I think thinking about what's valuable to you, and for me, having the freedom and control of my time, which is what financial independence buys you. There was nothing more important than that freedom. There was nothing money could buy that mattered more to me. And so not everybody's going to follow the simple path to wealth. But I think if you read The Simple Path to Wealth and Pathfinders, you'll realize at least it's an option. Because I think most Americans, most people in the world, don't even recognize that becoming financially stronger is an option for them, and how wonderful the benefits are. So at least if you read this, you'll know those it's possible and it's doable and it's available to you. And if you decide, yeah, it's not for me, well, I think you're making a mistake, but it's not my life. It's not my money.
I'm wondering, for our listeners, can you clarify what you mean by we have the option to be bolder when we're, financially stronger?
Sure. So the interim step, the way I think of it, is you become ultimately financially independent, but along the journey, you acquire what I refer to as FU money, and FU money allows you.
Is that an acronym too?
Yes, it's an acronym too, and I'm sure everybody knows that the F stands for forget. So it's forget you money, right? I can't imagine anybody thinking anything other than that. But anyway, FU money allows you to say forget you to anybody in your life that you feel the need to, particularly around employment. It allows you to be bolder in asking for what you want because you're not linked to living paycheck to paycheck. So when you're living paycheck to paycheck, you are absolutely dependent on that paycheck. And that means that you are not a free person, right? But the more FU money you have, the freer you are, and you don't have to have so much that you never have to work again. Okay.
JL, what was your first experience with FU money?
Well, it came early for me. In fact, it came in my 20s. I was in my first corporate job out of college, which took me 2 years to get. So it was something that was tough to come by, and it was a job I liked. But I'd gotten it into my head that I wanted to go backpack in Europe for a year, and I'd saved the princely sum of $5,000, which was enough to allow that in those days. I didn't realize things were negotiable, so I'm sitting there thinking, well, do I quit my job that I like and was hard to get, or do I take this trip? And then suddenly, as I was researching going to Europe, there was this airfare that became available that if you left on a certain day and came back 4 months later, it was very cheap, took me to Luxembourg. I thought, well, there's something in the middle. So I went to my boss and I said, Carl, what if I took this trip and I left on this day and I came back 4 months later, would you be willing to hold my job open? And he looked at me like I had two heads and he said, well, of course not. And again, not realizing things were negotiable and the power that I had, I walked out of his office saying, well, okay, now I have to make this decision. Do I stay or do I go? And I thought about it for a week and I thought, well, no, I really want to do this backpacking trip. So as much as I hate to give up the job, I went in and I resigned. And to my utter amazement, he said, well, wait a second, don't be hasty. Let's see what we can work out. And of course, then he came back and said, yeah, we can make that leave of absence work. Well, if I was working paycheck to paycheck, I never would have thought about going to Europe to begin with. I certainly never would have taken the risk of quitting. But by having that resource, by having that FU money, I had the power without even knowing it to do both.
I got to ask this question that's about, you believe that a house can be a lousy investment, right? And I guess let's clarify that you've devoted a full chapter to the pitfalls of spending money you don't have. And so with that background, can you help our listeners understand the consequences of taking on a significant mortgage, especially right now with rates so high?
Yeah, I wrote a post on the blog called "Why Your House is a Terrible Investment," and that's also a chapter in The Simple Path to Wealth. And somehow, I've developed this reputation of being anti-house, and I'm not. The truth is, I've owned houses most of my adult life, not always, but most of it. But I don't see houses as investments at all. I think houses are a lifestyle choice. I think of them as an expensive indulgence. Now, certainly there are times when people buy houses and they happen to get lucky and they're buying in the right area and they see some massive appreciation. I suppose people who bought in San Francisco over the past few decades have seen that. But then there are people who bought in Detroit who saw the very opposite. And of course, now I'm hearing all kinds of negative things about San Francisco. And I was just in Detroit earlier this year, and Detroit's undergoing a renaissance. So it could be in the coming decades, people will be talking about all those smart people who bought in Detroit and those poor people who made the mistake of buying in San Francisco. I'm not predicting that. I don't know. I'm just making the point that your house, you might get lucky, but you might not. So I think of it as an expensive indulgence. It's something to buy when you need it, when you can easily afford it, and when it's something that you think will make your life better, just like anything else you would buy. And then if it turns out well, then that's great. In terms of the interest rate environment now, I interest rates are, I don't know, 7-8%, or mortgage rates are 7-8%. I remember back in, I want to say 1981, I bought a two-family house in Chicago. I bought it for no money down, and I borrowed 2/3 of the money from the bank at 18%, and the other third from the seller at 7%, which I think came out to about an average of 13% or something, which was pretty wonderful.
Wow.
I'm recommending that, but you do what you need to do to make it happen. So, yeah, I think, if you're going to buy a house, buy it when you need it, buy the least house that meets your needs, and buy it from a position of financial strength. Don't fall prey to the propaganda. You should always buy the most house you possibly can, because that's how people get in financial trouble.
So let's assume that we have listeners whose New Year's resolutions might be to eliminate their debts. What approach or approaches do you recommend to break the chains, break the cycle of debt?
Yeah, so first of all, if you have debt, that's an emergency, and it's a great New Year's resolution. I am always a little bit stunned at how we accept debt in our culture these days as being something normal. To me, it's like being covered with blood-sucking leeches, and it's it's just pulling your life energy out of you, and why that's considered tolerable, let alone normal, baffles me. There's no easy way to get out of debt. You simply have to arrange your life in such a fashion you're not spending every dime that comes in, so you can free up some of that cash flow to start paying down that debt. The last thing you want to do is fall prey to these schemes that say, oh, we're going to consolidate your debt and make it easy. There is no easy way to do this. You just have to take out your sharpest knife and start scraping the little bloodsuckers off. I recommend that you make a list of all your debts, and you look at and you rank them by the interest rate you're paying, and you start paying off the one with the highest interest rate first. Now, I know some people recommend, pay off the smallest debt because it gives you this psychological boost. Now, okay, if you need psychological boosts, then maybe. But I'm a numbers guy, so I say pay off the expensive debt first. That's where your biggest return will be, and then just work your way down. Now, this is not easy to do, and there's no way around that. But here's the silver lining, that once you develop this habit of living on less than you earn so you can free up this money to pay off your debt, this is a habit that once that debt's gone, you can take into building your wealth, because it's the same discipline. So you divert all this money to pay off the debt. When it's gone, now you can channel that money into building into buying assets and buying your freedom.
So keeping with this kind of New Year's resolution theme for this podcast, for our married couples and partners that are listeners who want to save more in the coming year, what are the most important rules of the road for saving?
Well, saving it's the sort of the same process of paying off the debt. I so frequently talk to people who will say, "Wow, being financially independent sounds wonderful, and I want to do this, but I have to have these two least expensive cars in the driveway, and I have to live in this particular house, and I have to send my kids to these particular schools, and I have to have, and I have to have, and I have to have. And I call this the tyranny of must-haves. So the more of these must-haves you have in your life, the less likely you are to ever be financially independent, or frankly, to ever be doing anything other than living paycheck to paycheck and maybe even accumulating that consumer debt. Until you decide that the single most important must-have is your financial freedom, it's going to be tough to achieve because there's so many things that are competing for the money it's going to take. So you simply have to organize your life in such a fashion that you're diverting a large portion of that money to buying your freedom. Now, what that portion is, of course, is up to you, but clearly the longer or the greater your savings rate, the shorter the time to achieving financial independence. So that's certainly a personal choice. Now, for me, I did this right out of college. My first professional job paid $10,000 a year. I knew that there were people living on $5,000 a year, and 5,000 was a whole lot more than I'd been living on in college. So this was an easy thing to do. Clearly, it's a lot harder to do if you're in your 30s or 40s and you've created some lifestyle that you have to unwind. But there's no way around it. You simply have to figure that out.
Hey there, podcast fam. We'd love to hear from you. Please take this moment to rate and subscribe to our podcast. Your feedback fuels our passion to bring you more engaging content. And please text this episode to your friends. It's your support that can help us grow. Now back to the show.
And can you share for couples who perhaps they didn't take a personal finance class, or for whatever reason they don't know what an index fund is? Can you share what it is and why that makes the most sense?
Sure. So let's start and ask what a mutual fund is to begin with. So a mutual fund is simply a pool of investment money that's usually organized by an investment company, and they will take money from a variety of individual investors, and they will then turn around and invest that money according to the parameters that are laid out for that fund. So that's a mutual fund. So, for instance, it could be a stock mutual fund, mm-hmm. and then they'll invest the money in stocks. It could be a growth stock mutual fund. It can be a small cap or a small company stock fund. So there are all kinds of different ways. It can be a bond fund. It can be a fund that invests in gold or real estate investment trusts or whatever. So there's a whole range of mutual funds. And then in that range, there are actively managed funds and there are index funds. So an actively managed fund is kind of like what it sounds like. They employ professional investors to try to pick out the best stocks or the best REITs or whatever to outperform the market. And of course, that's expensive. These are not cheap people to hire. So those are going to have fairly high expense ratios, which is what you, the investor, pay. An index fund, on the other hand, says, the research is pretty clear that it's almost impossible to outperform the broad-based market over time with active investing. That sounds very counterintuitive to my ear and maybe does to your listeners, but the research over the last, since 1975, when Jack Bogle brought out the first index fund, it's definitive, right? And to put it in a nutshell, every year, maybe 25% of active managers outperform the market itself. And the further out you go, so 5 years, that number becomes less. In 10 years, it's even less. And by the time you're out 30 years, it's less than 1% of active managers outperform. That's statistically zero.
Right.
So that was the brilliance of Jack Bogle, the guy who created the first index fund, who started Vanguard is he did that research and he said, look, it's a lot cheaper to just buy everything in the index because now you don't have all those expensive managers and costs matter. He's famous for saying performance comes and goes, but costs are forever.
Yep.
So it's a lot cheaper. And, oh, by the way, you will perform better over time. So that's what an index fund is. Now, just like there are all kinds of mutual funds, there are now, unfortunately, in my view, all kinds of index funds.
Right.
You can buy an index fund of gold stocks. You can buy an index fund of banking stocks, financial stocks. When I talk about it, I'm talking about a very broad-based, low-cost index fund. Broad-based in my world is either an index fund that buys the S&P 500, which are the 500 largest companies in the United States, or my preference, what's called a total stock market index fund. That's where I invest my money, which literally buys virtually every publicly traded company in the United States in the case of VTSAX, which is Vanguard's total stock market fund and the one specifically that I use. There are also index funds that if you want international exposure, that will invest internationally. My preference, and I can't think of the ticker of it offhand, would be Vanguard's World Fund that invests in the U.S. and all the other countries proportionately. I don't feel the need for international, so I'm just in VTSAX.
What I love about index funds, particularly what you just shared of broad-based, have a piece of the total stock market across either the United States and or just across the world, is that it's simple. And I taught for 15 years, and you can see that people become a little fearful when you start to dive into the minutia of stocks and bonds and evaluating them, and you lose them. And when you enter in an index fund, it's just very simple to understand. You're just in the market, and over time, the market earns, let's just say, inflation adjusted dollars, roughly 8 or 9%. And if you start when you're young, you'll be just fine. And that I'm glad that you brought that up, because for young married couples or those transitioning to marriage, just to get started, and the time in the market is what's most important. If you can do it very simply through an index fund. Again, we're not financial planners, but we also recognize that 2 + 2 is 4. So it's very easy to see the patterns that have evolved over the last few decades. Now, money is the leading cause of stress in a marriage and a leading indicator of divorce. And so how is it that you can manage money in a way to have less stress and more freedom in your life?
So I think looking at the investment side of things, I would make 2 points. I would start by saying, you said it well. If you start early and you invest in, let's say, a total stock market fund like VTSAX, and you let the power of compounding work for you over the decades, and you stay the course, you're gonna do more than fine. You're gonna wake up one day stunned at how well you have done. And compounding is that hockey stick, right? If you graph it out, it kind of looks like there's not much progress, and all of a sudden it spikes up. That's kind of the nature of compounding. So you need to stay the course. You need to keep putting money in as much as you can, whenever you can, and stay the course is kind of what I say. Staying the course can be difficult because as powerful as stocks are in building wealth, and as powerful as investing in something like VTSAX is in building wealth over time, stocks are volatile.
Mm-hmm.
And every now and again, they do really scary things. They plunge. And so it's very important for anybody who follows my simple path to wealth, who invests in stocks, to understand that that is a perfectly normal part of the process. In fact, one of the reasons that stocks provide the best return of any asset class is because we have to accept that risk. We have to accept that volatility. That's the price for entrance. So the good news is, in my world at least, it's not really even risky. It's only volatility, because the market never stays down. It always recovers. But it's scary. And of course, the media goes absolutely nuts when the market takes a major plunge.
Yeah.
And all the talking heads are screaming, "This is it, sell, get out while you can, get out," which is the worst possible thing you can do.
Right.
Right. So the important thing to understand is that when the market has a correction, which is a 10% drop, or enters into a bear market, which is a 20+% drop, or starts to have a crash, which is 30, 40, 50+%, those are all normal parts of the process. There's nothing unusual going on here. It's scary. It can be dangerous if you panic, but it's like hurricanes in Florida or blizzards in New England. They can be dangerous and scary, but they're perfectly normal, and they don't last forever. They ultimately go away. So you have to understand that. You have to be mentally prepared for it. You have to tie yourself to the mast, as I say, so you don't let the sirens lure you onto the sirens of the media in panic lure you onto the rocks of disaster. And as long as you do that, then your mental framework should be, whenever the market drops, what a great buying opportunity.
Right.
People say, oh my gosh, the market's going down. I've been putting in X number of dollars a month. Maybe I'm going to stop that for a while. This is scary. That's exactly the last time you should, or the least likely time you should stop it. This is when you're getting to buy stuff on sale. If anything, you should be doubling up if you can. You should be scraping up pennies from the couch cushions to buy more while it's on sale. In fact, for anybody who's beginning to build their wealth or in the process of building their wealth, a market drop is a gift, because it means every dollar you're putting into the market is going to go a little bit further. So I hope anybody listening to this, the next time the market drops, instead of panicking, they can see what a blessing this is for people who stay the course and keep adding money to their portfolio.
I had a friend that shared with me a visual of the red light was blinking, that you see him flashing everywhere with the media going bananas about the market dropping. And he said whenever he sees that red light, what he sees is the red light in front of a retailer trying to advertise a sale, and that you need to get in there and buy as much as you can, because it is only a limited time opportunity. And he's my friend. I think my friend's right now, and you and I are both saying the same thing. It's not like he's going to buy an individual stock that's plummeting. He's just buying more index funds if he can. But as you said, if you're young, it's counterintuitive. You actually want the market to take these big dips at times, because you're just buying your investments at lower prices.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because, with everything else we buy, we love sales.
Right.
We love when it goes on sale, right? When they have Toyotathon at the end of the year, and, you can go buy a car for less than you might. I mean, we love that. But somehow when our investments go on sale, we panic. Instead of being, it's the old saying that Warren Buffett is famous for, be greedy when others are fearful, because that's when things are on sale. And then, of course, the corollary of that is be fearful when everybody else is being greedy. So when the market's dropping, that's whether or not the market makes you wealthy depends on what you do when the market's dropping. And if what you do is stay the course, and if anything, add even more to your routine investments, those drops will make you wealthy. If you panic and sell, if you can't stand that volatility, and I appreciate that for some people it is more than they can stand, you don't want to follow my advice. My advice will leave you bleeding at the side of the road. It is absolutely essential that you stay the course. But if you do that, then, one day you'll look at your investments and you'll be stunned at what you've accomplished.
Wonderful advice to end on. JL, it was an honor to have you on the Modern Husbands podcast. Thank you.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow Modern Husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.